Hello, hello, hello. Hey, everybody. I am so blessed to be back with you this morning. Welcome to Morning Stir with Yolanda Worldwide here on YouTube. For those of you who are jumping in live, this is a premiere. I had to switch up what I was going to do because of the nature of what's happening with me this week, but we are going to make our way through the Bible. We're set to finish up this Friday. So happy Monday to you. If you're joining me as a replay viewer, even though this is a premiere, I'm so glad you're here. Go ahead and leave a hashtag replay in the comments. Also, go ahead if you're brand new and subscribe, and then click on the little bell and enable the notifications so that you don't miss anything that I'm doing. We have some incredible things coming up next week. Our Expecting Greater Fast is kicking off midweek, January 22nd. So stick around. You'll hear the details of that all throughout the week. But for today, we are finishing up the book of Second Chronicles. I'll tell you right now, there's quite a bit of reading. So we're only going to be reading 5 minutes. That's not reading. We're only going to be praying in the spirit 5 minutes, as is what I usually do on a premiere anyway. And then I will be plowing through the rest of Second Chronicles. So stick with me. If you got to do something, listen to it as you're driving, whatever it is that you're doing. But we are getting through. After we get done with Second Chronicles, we're going to read John 1, the first half of John, and then the second half of John. We're going to read that over 2 days and then finish up with the book of Revelations on Friday. But Thursday and Friday. Blessings to you. Let's go ahead. Let me go ahead and say, number one, go ahead and greet me in the chat. Whatever way you do in your part of the world. Number two, let me know where in the world you're joining in from. Number three, if you haven't done so already, click the little thumbs up on the screen. Number four, help me to share this broadcast far and wide. And then if you are, number five, let me know in the comments, in the chat, I'm stirred up. If you are, go ahead and tell me I'm stirred up. Make your declaration and whatever else declaration you want to make today. But let's begin to pray in the Holy Ghost so we can get the reading started and get done for today. Rakatamandi ele bakore kele bataya, rekete yala bakore kele bata, rakatamandi ele bakore kele bataya, rekete yala bakore kele bata, randi ele bakore kele bataya, rekete yala bakore kele bataya, randi ele bakore kele bata, rakatamandi ele bakore kele bata, randi ikare kere kere kete, randi ele bakore kele bata, rakatamandi ele bakore kele bataya, rekete yala bakore kele bata, Randi ikere kere kere, Randi alabakore kere bataya, Rakatamandi ikere kete, Rakatamandi ikere kete, Randi ikere karabataya, Randi ikere kere bataya, Rakatamandi alabakore kere bata, Randi ikere kere bataya, Randi alabakore kere bataya, Rakatamandi alabakore kere bata, Rakatamaka rakataya, Rekete mande ki alabakore ke, Rekete mandi alabakore kere bata, Randi ikerekere bata, Randi ikerekete, Rakatamandi ikerekete, Rakatamandi ikerakata, Rakatamandi ikerekete, Reketemandi ikerekete, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete makarakata, Randi elebakore kerebataya, Reketemandi elebakore kerebataya. Rekete mandi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete mandi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete makarakata, Randi elebakore kerebata, Randi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebata, Rakarabakore kete, Randi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebataya, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakote kerebata, Rekete elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebata, Randi ikerekete, Randi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebata, Randi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebataya, Randi elebakore kerebata. Yerebakore kerebataya, Randi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kete, Rekete mandi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebataya, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Roko shatanama, Randi elebakore kerebata, Rakatamandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebata, Randi elebakore kerebata, Randi elebakore kerebata, Rekete makarakata, Rekete mandi elebakore kerebataya, Rekete elebakore kerebata, Randi elebakote kerebata, Rakatamandi ikerekete, Rekete mandi ikerekete, Rakatamandi ikerakata, Rakatamandi ikerekataya, Rekete makarakataya, Rakatamandi ikerekete, Rekete mandi ikerakata, Randi ikerakataya, Rakatamandi ikerekete, Rekete mandi ikerekete, Rakatamandi ikerakataya, Rakatamandi ikerakataya, Randi ilabakore kerebata, Rakatamandi yarabakore kerebata, Rakatamandi yarabakore kerebataya, Rekete yalabakore kerebata, Randi yarabakore kerebata, Randi yarabakore kerebataya, Rekete yalabakore kerebata, Randi yarabakore kerebataya, Randi yarabakore kerebataya, Rekete yalabakore kerebataya, Randi yarabakore kerebata, Rakatamandi yarabakore kerebata. Rekete yalabakore kerebata yarabakore kerebata, Randi yarabakore kerebata, Randi yarabakore kerebataya, Randi yarabakore kerebata, Randi yarabakore kerebataya, Randi yarabakore kerebataya, Rakatamandi yarabakore kerebataya, Rakatamandi yarabakore kerebata, Rakatamandi yarabakore kerebataya, Rekete yalabakore kerebataya, Rakatamandi yarabakore kerebata, Randi alabakore kerebataya, Rakatamandi yarabakore kerebataya, rabakore kerebataya. Father, you're worthy. Father, you are worthy. Father, you are worthy to be praised. Father, you are worthy to be praised. As we're getting ready to close in, Rakatamandi, as we are getting ready to close in on Second Chronicles, Rakataya rabakore kerebataya, I just can feel the pleasure of God with us. That will be 64 books of the Bible read when we get done today. I hope you're feeling good about it as I am. I am going to dive right into it because we got a lot of grounds to cover. We are picking up at chapter 24. We finished chapter 23 on Friday, depending on when you watch this. So let's just dive in and let's just do it. Second Chronicles chapter 24. Joash, whose mother Ziba was from Beersheba, was only 7 years old when he became king. He reigned 40 years in Jerusalem and followed the ways of the Eternal only as long as Jehoiada the priest was alive. Jehoiada was like a father to Joash, finding two wives for the king, who would father sons and daughters and reconstitute the Davidic line. After he established his family, Joash decided to restore the Eternal's temple because the wicked Athaliah's subjects had broken into the true God's temple and used its dedicated contents to worship the Baals. Joash to the priests and Levites said, collect money from all the Israelites living in the cities of Judah so you can repair your true God's temple each year. Begin this work quickly. The Levites did not act quickly as their king had demanded, so Joash rebuked Jehoiada, the chief priest, for not properly leading them. Joash said to Jehoiada, why have you not obeyed my request and required the Levites to collect money from Judah and Jerusalem? Moses, the eternal servant, decided that all Israel should pay this money each year to provide for the tent of the covenant law. He had a chest placed outside the Eternal's temple near the gate and told everyone in Judah and Jerusalem to bring the money that Moses, the servant of the true God, commanded Israel to bring to the Eternal while they were in the desert. All the officers and all the people were excited to help restore the temple as they had been when it was initially constructed. So they all put their money in the chest until it was full. Each day, the Levites returned the chest to the king's officer, where the king's scribe and the chief priest officer would empty the chest and return it to the temple gate. They emptied the chest every day because the people gave so much money. Joash and Jehoiada gave the money to the Eternal's temple servants who contracted masons, carpenters, and iron and bronze workers. These workers worked to repair, restore, and strengthen the true God temple to King David's original specifications. So much money had been collected that the workers were able to return the extra to Joash and Jehoiada and make gold and silver vessels and utensils for services and burnt offerings in the Eternal's temple. Having completed the renovations, everyone was faithful to God and gave burnt offerings in the Eternal's temple for the rest of Jehoiada's life. Jehoiada was rewarded for his faithfulness to God with a long life. He was 130 years old when he died, and the people buried him in the city of David, Jerusalem, among the kings, recognizing how he had helped Israel, his own extended family, and true God. Then the officials of Judah, who had abandoned the house of the Eternal One, the true God of their ancestors, to follow Asherim and other idols, came and bowed down to the king, convincing him to listen to their advice. Joash, in the absence of Jehoiada, then led the nation to abandon God. God was infuriated with Judah and Jerusalem. In spite of his anger, the Eternal sent prophets to tell the people how they had sinned and that they should repent, but they did not listen. Then the Spirit of the true God possessed Zechariah, Jehoiada the priest's son, giving him a message for the people. Zechariah said, standing above the people, "The true God has a message for you. Why do you disobey the Eternal's commands? You will not have prosperous lives as long as you continue this. Since you have abandoned him, he has abandoned you." The new advisors were so infuriated by his message that they conspired against him. Joash then commanded that the stone Zechariah inside that they stoned Zechariah inside the Eternal's temple courts by murdering Zechariah. Joash ignored how kind Jehoiada had been to him. Zechariah, while dying, said, "Eternal One, see how Joash has abandoned you and seek judgment on him." At the end of the year, the Aramean army attacked Judah and Jerusalem. It obliterated each of the officials who had advised Joash badly and sent the spoils to the king of Damascus, the capital city of Aram. Although the Aramean army was vastly outnumbered by the Judean army, the Eternal exercises judgment on Joash by giving the Arameans an impressive victory over the people who had abandoned the Eternal One, true God of their ancestors. When the Arameans left Judah, Joash was severely wounded. Now that the king's supporters were dead, his own servant Zabad, son of Shimeath, and the Ammonites, and Jehozabad, son of Shimrith, and the Moabites conspired to kill him. They remembered how he had killed Zechariah, Jehoiada's son. The servants murdered Joash while he rested on his bed and buried him in the city of David, Jerusalem. However, they did not entomb him with the kings, his own ancestors. The good things that he did while Jehoiada advised him were forgotten. More about Joash's reign, including the names of his children, the oracles against him, and the details of the temple's restoration is written in the commentary of the Book of the Kings. Amaziah, his son, succeeded Joash as king. Chapter 25, Amaziah, son of Joash, and Jehoadan of Jerusalem was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. He followed the Eternal, but was not completely devoted to him for his entire life. As soon as he took power in the southern kingdom, Amaziah solidified his throne by executing his opponents, the servants who had assassinated his father Joash. But Amaziah followed Moses' law, which the Eternal had commanded, and had mercy on their children. Everyone is responsible for his own sins. Therefore, parents will not be killed for their children's actions, and children will not be killed for their parents' actions. Then Amaziah prepared for battle by gathering the Judahites and appointing commanders from each family in Judah and Benjamin. He took a census of the men 20 years old and older, and there were 300,000 ready to fight with spears and shields. To enlarge his army, Amaziah also hired 100,000 heroic men from the northern kingdom for 7,500 pounds of silver. But Amaziah was warned against hiring mercenaries from the northern kingdom by a man who followed after the true God. The prophet of God said, O king, do not let the army of Israel fight with you. The Eternal does not support the northern kingdom, these Ephraimites. But if you do take the mercenaries with you, prepare yourself well for the battle. The true God will support your enemy rather than supporting you, because God has the power to build you up and tear you down. Amaziah said, but I have already paid 7,500 pounds of silver to the northern kingdom's troops. What should be done? The follower of God said, don't worry about the money. It is nothing compared to what the Eternal has to give to you. So Amaziah dismissed the northern kingdom's mercenaries as the man had advised him to do, and they returned home. The mercenaries were furious at Judah because they would lose their portion of spoils of victory. So they raided the cities in Judah, from Samaria in the north to Beth Horon in the south, killing 3,000 and taking spoils. But Amaziah was rewarded for obeying God's message. He strengthened himself and led only Judahite soldiers into battle at the Valley of Salt. There they killed 10,000 Edomites from the city of Seir and captured 10,000. The Judahites then threw the prisoners from the top of a cliff, crushing them on the rocks below. Unfortunately, Amaziah did not remain faithful to God and his messages. When he returned from fighting the Edomites, he brought the gods of Seir back to Jerusalem, where they worshiped them, bowing down and burning incense as he had worshiped God. Furious with Amaziah, the Eternal sent a message to the king through a prophet. What are you thinking? Why would you choose to follow gods that cannot save their own people from your armies after I gave you victory? Amaziah, interrupting, said, when did you become my advisor? Stop prophesying, or your life will be taken from you. The prophet said, I may not be one of your court advisors, but you should still listen to my counsel. If you do not, the true God will destroy you, because you have worshipped other gods and ignored my warning. Then Amaziah, king of Judah, listened to his royal counselors' advice and decided to address the northern kingdom's invasion of Judah. He sent a message to Joash, son of Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, the king of the northern kingdom, asking for a face-to-face meeting. Joash's response says, the thorn bush in Lebanon sent a message to the cedar in Lebanon, give your daughter to my son in marriage. But a wild beast in Lebanon trampled the thorn bush. You defeated the Edomites, and now you have become haughty for your own good. Stay where you belong. Do not provoke me to destroy both you and your people, Judah. But Amaziah would not listen to Joash's warning because the true God had allowed him to become stubborn. God intended to give Joash a victory over the southern kingdom because they worshiped the Edomite gods. Then Joash, king of the northern kingdom, traveled south to the interior of the southern kingdom to face Amaziah, king of the southern kingdom, at Beth Shemesh. As predicted, the northern kingdom defeated the southern kingdom, and the Judahites fled to their homes. Joash captured Amaziah, son of Joash, who was the son of Jehoahaz, at Beth Shemesh, and took him to Jerusalem, where the northern forces tore down 600 feet of the wall of Jerusalem from the gate of Ephraim to the corner gate. Joash took all the gold, silver, and utensils from the true God's temple from the service of Obed Edom. He then returned to Samaria with the temple treasures, palace treasures, and hostages. Amaziah, son of Joash, king of the southern kingdom, lived 15 years longer than Joash, son of Jehoahaz, king of the northern kingdom. All the events of Amaziah's reign are included in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel, from his ascension to his assassination. From the moment Amaziah stopped following the eternal to follow the Edomite gods, the people of Jerusalem plotted against him. He fled to Lachish, which where the people followed and killed him. They brought his body back to Judah on horseback, where they buried him. But Amaziah was not honored in his burial. He was not laid with the former kings, but with just his ancestors in the capital city of Judah, Jerusalem. Chapter 26. After Amaziah's death, the Judahites chose Uzziah, who was 16 years old, as their next king. During his reign, he captured the port city of Elath for Judah, bringing economic growth to the nation. Uzziah, son of Amaziah, and Jecoliah of Jerusalem reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. He acted just as his father Amaziah, his grandfather Joash, had following the eternal initially, then turning away from him. While Zechariah the seer was alive, Uzziah followed the true God, listening to Zechariah's messages from God, as Joash had listened to Jehoiada's counsel, and the true God blessed the king in battles, in building, and in wealth, as long as he was obedient. He attacked the Philistines and tore down the walls of Gath, Jabneh, and Ashdod. To further weaken their nation, Uzziah built cities around Ashdod, the Philistines' capital city, and elsewhere among the Philistines. Just as the true God helped him against the Philistines, he gave Uzziah victory over the Arabians in Gerbal and the Munites. Then the Ammonites paid tribute to Uzziah, and his political strength was infamous all the way to Egypt's border. In Jerusalem, Uzziah commissioned the building towers at the corner gate, the valley gate, and in the walls corners to further fortify the city. In the wilderness, he commissioned more towers and the digging of cisterns for his many livestock in the lowland and plain. And because he so cared for the land, he employed plowmen in the fertile fields and vine dressers in the hills to make the ground productive. Uzziah maintained a standing army ready for battle with numbered divisions and weapon specialties. Geo, the scribe, and Manasseh and Messiah, the official supervised by Hananiah, a royal officer, maintained the records of the divisions. Each division was led by a tribal leader who was also a heroic soldier. The 2,600 heroic soldiers controlled a talented army of 377,500. Soldiers who helped the king battle his armies. Uzziah provided shields, spears, helmets, body armors, bows, and sling stones to the army. In Jerusalem, he positioned catapults to shoot arrows and great stones, a new invention by ingenious men in the towers and on the corners of the city wall. Because of his impressive army, many of the surrounding nations knew about Uzziah and how God helped him win battles. But when Uzziah had built his army and he no longer thought he needed God's help in battles, he became prideful and corrupt. He was unfaithful to the Eternal One, his true God, entering the Eternal's temple to burn incense on the altar. Azariah, the priest, and 80 other brave priests of the Eternal followed the king into the temple to stop him. The priest said, Uzziah, you cannot burn incense to the Eternal. Only the priests, the sons of Aaron, have been consecrated for that action. Leave the temple now. You have sinned and will no longer be blessed by the Eternal One, the true God. Uzziah was furious at the priests for forbidding him, the king, to do something. As he stood next to the incense altar in the Eternal's temple holding the censer, the king's forehead erupted with leprosy and inflamed skin disease. Azariah, the chief priest, and all the priests saw how the Eternal struck the king with leprosy on his forehead. As Uzziah rushed for the door, the priest hurried him out because the disease made him ritually unclean and unable to approach the temple. For the rest of his life, King Uzziah was cursed with leprosy, so he was banned from the Eternal's temple and lived away from society. During his absence, his son Jotham was in charge and judged the southern kingdom. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, wrote about the rest of Uzziah's actions when Uzziah died. The people with his family buried him near his ancestors in a field that belonged to them. He was not buried in the same tomb as his ancestors because his skin disease made him unclean. Then his son Jotham succeeded him as king. Chapter 27. Jotham, son of Uzziah, and Jerusha, daughter of Zadok, was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He followed the Eternal as his father had at the beginning of his reign, but he did not enter the Eternal's temple. In spite of his devotion, the people continued in corrupt lifestyles. He built the upper gate of the Eternal's temple and the large wall of Ophel, the southern hill on the Temple Mount. He built cities in Judah's hill country and fortresses and towers in the forest. Jotham conquered the Ammonite king, and the Ammonites gave him 7,500 pounds of silver, 62,000 bushels of wheat, 10,000 of barley for 3 years. Jotham received all this wealth and power for himself and for the country because he followed the Eternal One, his true God. All the events of Jotham's reign, including his battles and other actions, are in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. He was 25 years old when he became king and ruled for 16 years. Jotham died, and his bones were gathered and buried along with his ancestors in the city of David. Jerusalem. His son Ahaz succeeded him as king. Chapter 28. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, but he did not follow the Eternal as his ancestor David had done. Instead, he acted like the kings of the northern kingdom and worshiped their gods. He polluted all the land with his idolatry, cast idols of the Baals, burned incense in the valley of Ben Hinnom, Jerusalem's refuse pit, and sacrificed his own children. Such evil things had not happened throughout the land on high places, hills, and under trees since the Eternal conquered the previous inhabitants and gave the land to the Israelites. The Eternal One, his true God, was furious with Ahaz for his apostasy. So he empowered the king of Aram to defeat the southern kingdom and take Judean prisoners of war to Damascus, the capital of Aram. But this wasn't enough to satisfy God's anger. He also empowered the northern kingdom to kill many of the Judeans. Pekah, son of Remaliah, in one day killed 120,000 valiant warriors who had abandoned the Eternal One, the true God of their ancestors, and Zikri, a Ephraimite warrior, killed Messiah, Ahaz's son, Azrikam, leader of the palace, and Elkanah, vice regent. Then the northern soldiers took 200 Judean women and children and their possessions to Samaria, the capital of northern kingdom. As the northern army approached Samaria, Obed, a prophet of the Eternal, ran out to meet them. Obed said, "Do not think that you have won the victory yourselves. In fact, the Eternal One, the true God of your ancestors, was furious with Judah and used you to punish them. But now he is furious with you because your rage was excessive and has reached the heavens, and you intend to make your captives from Judah and Jerusalem into your slaves. You are already guilty of sins against the eternal, your true God. So why do you want to anger him even more? Instead of enslaving the southern captives, return them to their nation and stop infuriating the eternal." Then some Ephraimite chiefs, Azariah, son of Johanan, Berechiah, son of Meshillemoth, Jehizekiah, Jehizkiah, son of Shallum, and Amasa, son of Hadlai, stopped the soldiers. The Ephraimite chief said, "Stop, do not bring those prisoners back to our city, for we are all convicted of our guilt. If you do, the Eternal will be more furious with us due to our sins and guilt. There is now a fierce wrath against Israel." The soldiers obeyed. They left the prisoners and the spoils for the chiefs and the assembly to decide what to do. The chiefs dressed the naked prisoners with clothes and shoes from the spoils, fed them, anointed their heads with oil to refresh them after the journey, and returned them to the southern city of Jericho, the city of palm trees, with an envoy of northerners and the feeble riding on donkeys. Then the northerners returned to Samaria. The Eternal humbled Judah with continued attacks against them because of Ahaz's wicked rebellion against him, which had infected the entire nation. The Edomites attacked Judah and took prisoners. The Philistines invaded the lowland and the Negev, capturing and settling in the cities and surrounding villages of Beth Shemesh, Ajalon, Gederoth, Soko, Timnah, and Gimzo. King Ahaz asked the Assyrians for help, but Pilnasar, king of Assyria, recognized an opportunity to expand his empire and attacked Judah instead of helping Ahaz. To save his kingdom from complete destruction by the Assyrian army, Ahaz gave a tribute from his own palace from the Eternal's temple to Tilgath-Pilneser, but the tribute did not work. During these disasters, King Ahaz did not return to the Eternal. Instead, he persisted in his unfaithfulness by sacrificing to the Aramean gods of Damascus, the gods of the first people who had defeated him. Ahaz said, "Obviously, the gods of the kings of Aram are more powerful than the Judean God. Since they helped the Aramean army, surely they will help me if I sacrifice to them." But these gods were the downfall of him and all Israel. He destroyed the vessels from the true God's temple and stopped all worship in the Eternal's temple. Then he built his own altars throughout Jerusalem and high places throughout Judah to burn incense to false gods. These actions infuriated the Eternal One, the true God of his ancestors. Ahaz's remaining actions from his birth until his death are contained in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel. Ahaz slept with his fathers in Jerusalem, but not in the tombs of the kings of Israel. His son Hezekiah succeeded him as king. Chapter 29. Hezekiah, son of Abijah, Zechariah's daughter, became king when he was 25 years old and reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. He followed the Eternal just as his ancestor David did. Hezekiah's first action when he began to reign was reopening and repairing the Eternal's temple. He called all the priests and the Levites into the square east of the temple. Hezekiah said to the Levites, "Listen to me. First, you must sanctify yourselves so that you can sanctify the temple of the eternal, the true God of your ancestors, and remove the immoral and ungodly items that are there. The previous generations forgot the laws of the eternal one, our true God, and were unfaithful, abandoning the temple, ignoring him with their backs turned, closing the doors of the front of the temple so no one else could worship there, extinguishing the temple lamps and stopping the incense and burnt offerings to the true God of Israel. For these offenses, the Eternal has punished us, Judah and Jerusalem, as you have witnessed with deaths, disasters, and derision. Our fathers were slaughtered in the wars with the Arameans and the northern kingdom, and our wives and children are still prisoners of those wars. But I want to renew a covenant with the eternal God of Israel and follow his ways again so that he will not continue to be angry with us. Now that we have made this commitment, we must not abandon the eternal who expects us to be in his presence, serve him, minister on his behalf to others, and burn incense continually." Then 7 Levite families sent forward representatives from the main Levite lines: Mahath, son of Amasai, and Joel, the son of Azariah, from the Kohathites, Kish, son of Abdi, and Azariah, son of Jehalelel, from the sons of Merari, Joah, son of Zimmah, and Eden, the son of Joah, from the Gershonites, and Shimri and Jeel, from the sons of Elizaphan, from the Levitical singers, Zechariah and Mattaniah; from the sons of Asaph, Jehiel and Shimei; from the sons of Heman and Shemaiah and Uzziel; from the sons of Jeduthun. The representatives gathered all of their children, sanctified themselves, then sanctified the Eternal's temple as the king commanded and as the Eternal desired. The priests cleansed the most holy place in the Eternal's temple, taking every unclean thing outside into the temple courts, from where the Levites then took them to the Kidron Valley to be discarded. This cleansing began on the first day of the first month and ended on the 8th day of the month, when they were finally able to enter the Eternal's temple porch. Then they blessed the Eternal's temple, which took 8 more days and ended on the 16th day of the first month. Then they told King Hezekiah all they had done. The Levites said, "We have cleansed all of the Eternal's temple, the altar of burnt offering, the table of unleavened bread, and all of the utensils. All we have recovered and sanctified, all the utensils which King Ahaz disposed of during his despicable reign. Now they too are at the Eternal's altar." King Hezekiah woke up early and assembled the city leaders at the Eternal's house. The men brought 7 bulls, 7 rams, 7 lambs, and 7 male goats as sin offerings, representing the atonement of the entire kingdom, the sanctuary, and Judah. Hezekiah then ordered the priests, the sons of Aaron, to sacrifice for the southern kingdom's sins on the Eternal's altar, slaughtering the bulls, rams, and lambs, and sprinkling their blood on the altar. Then they sacrificed for the atonement of all of Israel, the north and the south, as Hezekiah requested, by offering the male goats. The priests brought the goats before the king, and the leaders laid their hands on the animals, slaughtered them, and covered the altar with their blood. He assigned the priests to play their trumpets and the Levites to play King David's cymbals, harps and lyres in the Eternal's temple, as the Eternal had commanded them to do through the words of David, Gad, David's seer, and Nathan the prophet. Then Hezekiah commanded the burnt offering he offered on the altar. During the offering, the musicians played their trumpets and David's instruments, performing the song to the Eternal. The people worshiped, the singers sang, and the trumpets sounded until the burnt offering was consumed. Then the king and all the people there bowed down and worshiped. Hezekiah and the leaders said to the Levites, "Sing the songs of David, the king, and Asaph, the seer, praising the Eternal One with their lyrics." So the Levites praised him joyously and bowed before him in worship. Hezekiah said to the people, "Now that you have cleansed yourselves with the blood offerings, show your gratitude by bringing your sacrifices and thanksgiving and burnt offerings to the Eternal's temple." The people did as Hezekiah suggested, offering 600 bulls and 3,000 sheep, and some also brought burnt offerings to the Eternal, 70 bulls, 100 rams, and 200 lambs. Because of the large number of offerings, the priests could not prepare all of the burnt offerings, and the Levites had to help them skin the animals until all had been sacrificed. And the priests had all sanctified themselves, which the Levites had already done, since they were more concerned with cleansing than the priests were. The quantity of the burnt offerings, the fat of the peace offerings, and the libations for the burnt offerings were enough to restore the Eternal's temple and its practices. So Hezekiah and all the people rejoiced over how quickly the true God had changed the hearts of the people and brought them back to following him. Chapter 30. Since the people could not gather in Jerusalem immediately, and since not enough priests were sanctified in time to celebrate the Passover holiday during the first month of his reign, Hezekiah, the leaders, and the people of Jerusalem decided to celebrate during the second month. So he decided to send word to everyone from Beersheba in the far south to Dan in the far north to come to the Eternal's temple in Jerusalem and celebrate the Passover, honoring the Eternal One, true God of Israel. Until Hezekiah, Judah had not celebrated as frequently as they should have. So messengers carried letters written by the king and his leaders throughout the kingdoms. The letter said, "People of Israel, return to the ways of the Eternal One, true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and he will return to those of you who escaped the conquering kings of Assyria to follow him. Don't be like your relatives who ignored the Eternal One, the true God of their fathers. They were destroyed and became horrific spectacle to other nations. Do not be stubborn as they were. Obey him, come to his sanctuary, and serve the Eternal One, your true God, so that he will not be angry with you. If you return to his ways, then your families who were exiled by the Assyrians will receive compassion and will return to their homes, because the Eternal One, your true God, is gracious and compassionate and will return to you if you return to him." When the messengers took this message throughout the northern kingdom, most of the northerners ridiculed and ignored the message, but some people from the northern tribes of Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun obeyed Hezekiah and the leaders and humbly traveled to Jerusalem, just as all the southern kingdom were given one mind and obeyed under the guidance of the true God via the command of the king and his officials. Vast numbers of people responded to the king's message and traveled to Jerusalem to celebrate the festival of unleavened bread in the second month. As part of the festivities, the people destroyed the Canaanite altars in Jerusalem and threw the incense altars into the Kidron Valley. They slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th of the second month. The priests and the Levites humbled themselves, sanctified themselves, and brought burnt offerings to the Eternal's temple There, they attended to their assigned duties as Moses, the follower of the true God, had described sprinkling the blood of the animals which the Levites sacrificed. The Levites slaughtered the Passover lambs, and that they were offered by the unclean people in the assembly, while those who had sanctified themselves slaughtered their own lambs to the eternal. Many of the people from the tribes of Ephraim, Manasseh, Issachar, and Zebulun had not cleansed themselves as prescribed, but they were able to eat the Passover feast because Hezekiah prayed on their behalf. Hezekiah said, Eternal One, because you are good, cover their sins for everyone here who has neglected to ritually cleanse himself in order to properly enter the temple of the true God, the eternal God of our ancestors. Everyone here wants to follow you. The Eternal One heard Hezekiah's prayer and healed them from the threat of disease for not approaching God as instructed. So the Israelites who had traveled to Jerusalem joyously celebrated the festival of unleavened bread for 7 days, while the Levites and the priests played their instruments, praising the eternal daily. Hezekiah commended the Levites who had remained faithful and prudent toward the eternal, and everyone celebrated for 7 days, feasting, sacrificing peace offerings, and offering praise to the eternal one, true God of their ancestors. Everyone decided to celebrate for another 7 days, and they celebrated with joy. By the time the festival ended, Hezekiah, king of the southern kingdom, had donated 1,000 bulls and 7,000 sheep, and the leaders had donated 1,000 bulls and 10,000 sheep for the people to sacrifice. Also, many priests had sanctified themselves. Everyone in Judah rejoiced, priests, Levites, northerners who had traveled for the festivals, and northerners who had moved to Judah permanently. Nothing like this celebration had happened in Jerusalem since the reign of Solomon, son of David, so the people were joyous. Finally, the Levitical priest concluded the festival by blessing the people, and he heard their prayer from his sacred dwelling in heaven. Chapter 31. When the Passover was finished, all the Israelites who had attended the festival left Jerusalem for the cities of Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh. There they continued Hezekiah's zeal by destroying all cultic statues and carved images of Asherah, having purged the nation of idolatrous symbols like the high places and altars. The Israelites returned to their own homes. Meanwhile, Hezekiah continued structuring the temple activities. He reorganized the divisions of priests and Levites according to their duties, such as making burnt or peace offerings, ministering, worshiping, or praising near the gates to the Eternal's camp. Just as his ancestors David and Solomon did before him, Hezekiah donated a portion of his animals for the morning, evening, Sabbath, new moon, and other festival burnt offerings, as the Eternal's law requires. He also commanded everyone in Jerusalem to offer a portion of their possessions to the priests and the Levites so that each person could participate in the Eternal's law by tithing. Once everyone had heard Hezekiah's request, the Israelites in Jerusalem gave more than was required from their best grain, wine, oil, honey, and produce, creating a surplus of offerings. Those Israelites living in neighboring Judahite cities brought tithes and offerings of oxen, sheep, and other sacred gifts, which were cleansed and piled high for use by the Eternal One, their God. The offerings continued from the 3rd month until the 7th month, when the offerings were so plentiful that they lay in stacks around the temple yard. Seeing the heaps of tithes, Hezekiah and his officers praised the Eternal and blessed the Israelites who had answered their obligations. Hezekiah wondered why all the gifts had not been offered to God. So he asked the priests and Levites what would happen to the offerings. Azariah, the chief priest, and a Zadokite answered, Azariah said, the Eternal One has favored his people, and they have shown their thankfulness with immense generosity. Since the Israelites began bringing their gifts to the Eternal's temple, there has been more than enough to eat and have plenty left over to sacrifice. Having no place to put the abundance, Hezekiah commanded the priests and Levites to prepare storage rooms in the Eternal's temple. Once the rooms were ready, the people continued offering their gifts, which were organized by Conaniah, the Levite, and his brother and assistant Shimei. They supervised Jehiel, Azaziah, Nahath, Asahel, Jeremoth, Jozabad, Elio, Ismachiah, Mahath, and Benaiah, who were all appointed overseers of the tithes by both King Hezekiah and chief priest Azariah. Hor, son of Imnah the Levite and the eastern gatekeeper, distributed the freewill offerings to the true God, both the contributions to the eternal and the most sacred gifts. He supervised Eden, Miniamin, Jeshua, Shemaiah, Amariah, and Shechaniah in the cities of the priests, and they fairly distributed the goods to the Levites by their divisions and gave an equal amount to all men 30 years old and older, regardless of the size of their division or their lineage, who entered the Eternal's temple to perform the daily duties. Kor and his men also distributed goods to the priests according to their lineage and to the Levites 20 years old and older according to their duties and divisions. Included in those genealogical records were the Levites and priests, wives and children who also cleansed themselves regularly to be holy before him. Even the descendants of Aaron who lived outside the cities in the surrounding pasture lands were provided for. In each city, the men were designated to distribute goods to every male priest and every Levite included in the Levitical genealogy. Hezekiah organized the religious practices throughout all of Judah, just as the Eternal, his true God, considered right. Every idea Hezekiah had concerning the improvement of the true God's temple was begun by his commandments and carried out by his people. And Hezekiah did all out of a dedicated heart and was rewarded for his work. Chapter 32. After his acts of faithfulness toward God, Hezekiah faced the greatest challenge of his reign. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, invaded Judah and besieged the fortified cities, intending to conquer them for himself. Realizing that Sennacherib would eventually reach Jerusalem, Hezekiah prepared the city for a long siege. First, the king's officers and warriors, with a large number of people, dammed the water sources, both springs and rivers, outside the city, so that when the Assyrians came, they could not readily use the water sources. Second, Hezekiah reinforced the city by repairing the existing wall structure which surrounded the city, building towers for offensive position, and erecting another wall far outside the main city wall. Between the two walls, he strengthened the city's millow. Third, he cast new weapons and shields in abundance. Finally, he appointed the military leaders over the people and commissioned them at the city gate. Hezekiah said, "We can be strong and courageous because of the one who fights with us. Don't be discouraged or fearful of the Assyrian king and the multitude of his people, for greatness is with us more than with them. Sennacherib will fight with an arm of flesh and bone, but we will fight with the eternal God's help and his warfare." The people were strengthened by the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah, while Sennacherib with his forces was busy besieging Lachish in a bloody battle. The king of Assyria sent messengers to Jerusalem to persuade Hezekiah and all the Judahites to surrender. Their message was, why are you remaining in Jerusalem when you know I am about to come destroy your city? What could you possibly be trusting that could save you from my army? Hezekiah must be entertaining you with lies, telling you how the eternal God will save you from my conquest. If you listen to him, we will certainly conquer you while you die of hunger and thirst inside those walls. Hezekiah removed his high places and altars from all the country, forcing everyone to come to Jerusalem to worship. Haven't you heard how my empire's army has destroyed peoples and nations for years? We even conquered your own brothers in the northern kingdom. Where were their gods when their nations needed defending? Needed defending. Where will your true God be when you are being tortured and murdered? Stop listening and being deceived by Hezekiah. He is only giving you false hope. No God has ever rescued his people from me or my royal fathers before me. So what makes you think your God will? Sennacherib's servants continued, blaspheming Hezekiah and the eternal God. The Assyrian king himself wrote additional letters insulting the eternal God of Israel, reminding the people that no God had ever saved his people from Assyrians, and Israel's God couldn't either. Furthermore, Sennacherib wrote that God was a creation of humans, just as all the other pagan gods are. These letters were shouted in the common Judahite language of Hebrew as the people of Jerusalem stood on the city wall listening. The messengers thought their words would terrify and disturb the people into surrendering the city. But King Hezekiah and Isaiah the prophet, son of Amoz, were not threatened by the Assyrians' words. They relied on their God and called to heaven for help. The Eternal responded quickly, sending a heavenly messenger to slaughter every Assyrian soldier, commander, and officer, having been decidedly defeated by the very God he had taunted. Sennacherib in shame journeyed back to Assyria in the security of his own God's temple. Sennacherib was stabbed to death by his own children. In this decisive way, the Eternal saved Hezekiah and Jerusalem from Sennacherib's attempted conquest and any other nation's imperial intentions. So God provided for his people by those around Judah. Many people brought gifts to the Eternal and Hezekiah in Jerusalem so that other nations recognized the king's authority. Hezekiah became proud and neglected to appreciate the gifts he received. So the Eternal was angry with him and all of Jerusalem and Judah. When Hezekiah became deathly ill, he realized what he had done wrong. He humbled himself and prayed to the Eternal, who answered the prayer and healed him as a sign. The people of Jerusalem and Judah also humbled themselves so that he was no longer angry with his people during Hezekiah's days. In fact, the true God blessed them with great wealth and honor. Hezekiah filled his treasuries with silver, gold, gems, spices, shields, and other valuables. He filled his storehouses with grain, wine, and oil. His stables contained all kinds of cattle and flocks. Then Hezekiah built more cities and acquired more flocks and herds. He also dammed the Gihon River and diverted its waters to the west side of Jerusalem. Hezekiah was successful at all his endeavors. Later, when the rulers of Babylon sent diplomats to learn about the miraculous sign given to Hezekiah's healing, when the sun moved backwards, the true God left Hezekiah and tested the king's heart and devotion to him. The other actions and devotion of King Hezekiah from his birth to his death are recorded in the vision of Isaiah the prophet, son of Amoz, in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Hezekiah joined his ancestors in death and was laid in an upper tomb, a place of honor with the descendants of David. He was mourned by all Judah and all Jerusalem. Hezekiah's son Manasseh reigned in his place. Chapter 33. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned 55 years in Jerusalem, the longest of any king in Israel. He behaved wickedly before the Eternal, acting with the same abominations as the previous nations did before the Eternal gave their land to Israel. He reversed the good deeds of Hezekiah, rebuilding the high places and altars for the Baals and hoisting carved images of Asherah into the skies. He worshiped all the celestial bodies as false deities. He even desecrated the Eternal's temple, the place honoring his reputation, which was to remain in Jerusalem forever, by building pagan altars in two courts there in the valley of Ben Hinnom. Manasseh offered his children as burnt offerings to those false gods and used every form of magic, witchcraft, divination, sorcery, and necromancy. Manasseh's evil actions infuriated the Eternal, but the worst of his actions was his installation of an image of a statue in the true God's temple. Many years before, when his glory entered the temple for the first time, God had spoken. The Eternal One said to David and his son Solomon, "From among all the tribes I have chosen this house and this city, Jerusalem, from all the cities throughout Israel. This place will honor my reputation forever, so that I will never allow Israel to leave the land that I gave to your ancestors. As long as you and your descendants follow the laws and requirements I gave to you through Moses." Manasseh corrupted Judah and the people of Jerusalem until they were more evil than the nations whom the Eternal had destroyed before the Israelites. Their minds were so full of sin that they didn't hear the Eternal asking them to return to his ways. So, to get their attention, the Eternal used the Assyrian army to express his anger. The commanders captured Manasseh, forced a ring through his nose, bound his limbs with bronze chains, and carried him to Babylon as if he were an animal. From this position of complete powerlessness, Manasseh finally humbled himself and begged the forgiveness of the eternal God of his fathers. He heard Manasseh's prayer and found it sincere. He returned Manasseh to the throne in Jerusalem. From that day forward, Manasseh never doubted that the Eternal was the true God. Having returned to proper faith, Manasseh continued his father's work. He finished building the outer city wall from the west side of the Gihon River through the valley to the Fish Gate. Then he built high walls around the hill of Ophel and stationed commanders at each fortified city in Judah. Then Manasseh began to purge the nation of the sin he had brought there. He tore out the idols from inside the Eternal's temple and the foreign altars from the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, disposing of them outside the city. He then restored the Eternal's altar and gave grateful offerings of peace and praise there, even though Manasseh ordered the Judahites to serve only the eternal God of Israel in the way that he commanded. They continued to sacrifice to the eternal God at other high places instead of only in Jerusalem. The other actions of Manasseh from his birth to his death, including his prayer to his true God and the oracles of the seers, those proclaiming the reputation of the eternal God of Israel, are recorded in the chronicles of the kings of Israel. His prayer, the true God's compassion, and a record of his sins, unfaithfulness, and the locations of the high places and cultic statues before he humbled himself are written in the chronicles of Hosea. But when Manasseh joined his ancestors in death, the people buried him in his house, not in the tombs with his ancestors. His son Amon reigned in his place. Amon was 22 years old when he began his short 2-year reign in Jerusalem. Like his father Manasseh, Amon committed evil acts before the Eternal by serving and sacrificing to Manasseh's carved cultic images. But unlike his father, Amon did not recognize his sins and humble himself. In fact, his guilt was so prolific that his own servants murdered him in the palace. So the people killed the conspirators for their betrayal of King Amon and anointed Amon's son Josiah as king instead. Chapter 34. Wow, chapter 34. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned 31 years in Jerusalem. He was one of the few great kings of Israel who determinedly obeyed the eternal and followed the example of his ancestor David. His zeal for the true God of David began in the 8th year of his reign while he was still a child of 16. But he did not begin his reforms of Judah and Jerusalem until he was 20 years old. Then he removed the high places, chopped down the sacrificial altars and incense altars of the Baals, and smashed the carved and molten images of Asherah and other gods. He then took the broken pieces of the icons, crushed them into powder, and sprinkled that powder on the graves of the people who had worshiped them. He even burned the bones of the priests who had served those gods on the cultic altars to completely purge Judah and Jerusalem. He then continued his reforms throughout the region, including Manasseh, Ephraim, Simeon, and Naphtali, and their surrounding villages, where he personally smashed the carved images of Asherah and other gods into powder and chopped down the incense altars. Then he returned to Jerusalem. By the 18th year of his reign, Josiah had cleansed the nation and the temple. Now it was time to repair them, both by rebuilding the temple. He sent Shaphan, son of Azaliah, Maaseiah, a city official, and Joah, son of Joahaz, the recorder, to the temple of the true God, the eternal, in order to organize repairs there. First, they took the money from the temple coffers and gave it to Hilkiah, the high priest, so he could oversee the funds for the temple repairs. The money had been collected at the temple by the Levite doorkeepers from those remaining in the northern kingdom, including Manasseh and Ephraim, and from all those in the southern kingdom, including Judah, Benjamin, and the city of Jerusalem. The money went to the Eternal's temple construction supervisors, who then subcontracted the work to tradesmen and craftsmen. Those subcontractors purchased cut stone, timber, and couplings to build the portions of the temple that had become ruined because of the neglect by the kings of Judah. The subcontractors were dependable workers, following the guidance of their supervisors. Jahath and Obadiah, Levites from the clan of Merari, Zechariah and Meshullam, Levites from the clan of Kohath, and the Levite musicians. These supervisors guided everyone on the job, from the subcontractors and foremen to the unskilled laborers, while performing their regular duties of record keepers, officials, and gatekeepers. As Josiah's 3 servants were bringing out the money from the Eternal's treasury, Hilkiah the priest made an unexpected discovery. Deep inside the temple storerooms, long forgotten, was the Eternal's law book, rules he had given to the Israelites through Moses. Hilkiah said to Shaphan the scribe, "Look at what I have found. This is the Eternal's law book, which was buried inside the temple." Hilkiah gave the book to Shaphan, who took it to the king and affirmed that they were proceeding with the temple repairs. Shaphan said to Josiah, "All the repairs you planned for the temple are going well. Your 3 servants have taken the money from the Eternal's temple treasury and allocated it to the supervisors and subcontractors. In the midst of the temple restoration works, Hilkiah the priest made a discovery. He found this book." Shaphan then read these laws in the presence of the king. When the king heard those words, he realized how far his nation had drifted from God's path, and he tore his clothes in mourning. He then summoned 5 of his high-ranking officials: Hilkiah, Ahikam, son of Shaphan, Abdon, son of Micah, Shaphan the scribe, and Asaiah, the king's servant. Josiah said, you must intercede for me and for all those who remain in Israel and Judah. Ask the Lord about these laws which we have just found. The Eternal must be furious with us because our ancestors disobeyed his laws in this book. Soon he will unleash that anger and punish us all. The four men, including Hilkiah, went straight to Huldah, the prophetess in Jerusalem's second quarter, because they knew he would speak through her. Huldah was the wife of Shallum, son of Tokhath, son of Hazra, the keeper of the wardrobe. Huldah said, these are the words of the eternal God of Israel. Tell Josiah, king of Judah, that I will indeed curse this nation and these people, just as the book says I will, because they have disobeyed me and made sacrifices to other gods, intending to infuriate me by their actions. The pain and suffering you are about to experience will be unbearable and unending. But to the king of Judah, who sent you to me, I, the Eternal, the God of Israel, have noticed your reforms. Because you recognize the true God's laws, which convicted your nation of their sins, and you humbled yourself and mourned your nation's actions by tearing your clothes, I have heard you and will have mercy on you. You will die and lie with your ancestors in peace before I unleash my anger on this nation. So your eyes will not witness the great disaster that I am about to bring forth on this place and those dwelling here. The four servants gave the king this message, and he immediately summoned all the elders in Judah and Jerusalem. The entire nation, great and small, priests and laymen, man and woman, went up to the Eternal's temple, where Josiah read to them the laws from the book of the covenant that was found in the Eternal's temple. There, the king and the entire assembly in Jerusalem, people from Benjamin and Judah, stood and renewed Israel's covenant with the Eternal, promising to follow his ways, obey his laws with all diligence, and perform the duties of the covenant described in the book. Then all the people in Jerusalem respected their covenant with the true God, the God of their ancestors, and Josiah purged all the lands of Israel of false worship, making certain everyone in Israel served the eternal God, the people remained faithful to the eternal God of their ancestors throughout Josiah's reign. Chapter 35. On the 14th day of the first month, after Josiah had rededicated the nation to God, the king instituted the Eternal's Passover feast in Jerusalem by slaughtering the Passover animals. Josiah appointed the priests and encouraged them in performing their duties for the Eternal's temple. Then he commissioned the Levites, Israel's teachers, and the Eternal's most holy servants in their various duties for the feast. Josiah said, you no longer need to carry the Holy Covenant chest on your shoulders. Bring it to the temple which Solomon, son of King David, built and leave it there. From now on, your primary responsibility is serving the eternal God and his people Israel. Cleanse yourselves as King David and his son Solomon described for you in writing, according to your lineage and duties. Then stand with your kinsmen inside the temple, dividing yourselves by the tribes and your father's household under whom you serve. Once you are organized, slaughter the Passover animals, cleanse yourselves, and prepare your people to participate in the ceremonies of the Eternal's law by Moses describes. Josiah donated 30,000 lambs and young goats and 3,000 bulls from his own herds and flocks for the people to sacrifice as the Passover offerings. Then his officers in the true God's temple voluntarily gave offerings for the people, priests, Levites, Hilkiah, Zechariah, and Jehiel donated 2,600 sheep and 300 bulls for the Passover. Conaniah, Shemaiah, Nathaniel, and his brothers, Hashabiah, Jeiel, and Josabad, all officers of the Levites, donated 5,000 sheep and 500 bulls to the Levites for the Passover. Once the service was prepared, the priests were ready to perform their duties, and the Levites stood in their division as the king commanded. They offered the Passover animals. The Levites skinned all the animals. The priests sprinkled the animals' blood, and then they roasted the animals on the altar. Once the animals were roasted, they took down the carcasses and described them and distributed them to each tribe for offerings to the Eternal, just as the book of Moses prescribed. The Levites then boiled the other holy offerings in containers and took them to the people. Once the people of the nation were enjoying the feast, the Levites prepared meals for themselves, and the priests, the Aaronites, who were busy with the burnt and fat offerings until late in the evening, the singers, the sons of Asaph, Heman, Jeduthun, the king's seer, and the gatekeepers, so that none of them needed to leave their prescribed duties to enjoy the feast. On that day, all the eternal servants completed preparations for the Passover, giving burnt offerings on the eternal's altar as Josiah commanded. And all the Israelites who were present in Jerusalem celebrated the Passover, the feast of unleavened bread, for a full week. This was the first Passover feast since Samuel was judging Israel. No other king's festival was ever as precise or as well attended by the priests, Levites, and all the Israelites. It took place during Josiah's 18th year as king. After the incredible success of the Passover and Josiah's organization of the temple operations, the Egyptian king Necho passed through Israel on his way to attack Carchemish, a Babylonian possession on the Euphrates, because of his alliance with the Assyrians. When Josiah marched out to meet Necho, the Egyptian king sent his messengers. Necho's message was, "Why are you getting involved in the dispute? King of Judah, I am simply passing through your region on my way to attack another nation, as God has asked me to do. I am not attacking you. Stop your forces from interfering with my army, or God, who is with me, will destroy you." But Josiah ignored Necho's message and his warning that were from the mouth of God. Josiah disguised himself and attacked Necho's army on Megiddow's plain. Necho's archers quickly wounded King Josiah. Josiah said to his servants, "Get me off of this battlefield. I am badly injured." His servants took him out of his battle chariot and carried him to another chariot that they could drive to Jerusalem. There Josiah died and was laid to rest with his fathers. All of Judah and Jerusalem mourned his death. The prophet Jeremiah even composed a lament for Josiah, which all singers remember when they sing their lamentations today. During our exile from Israel, the lament became a state anthem and is recorded in the Book of Laments. The other actions of Josiah and his loyal deeds from his birth to his death are recorded in the Eternal's Law and the Book of the Kings of Israel and Judah. And the final chapter of Second Chronicles, chapter 36. The Israelites chose Josiah's son Joahaz, also named Jehoahaz, as his father's successor in Jerusalem. He was 23 years old when he ascended to the throne, but his reign in Jerusalem only lasted 3 months. Necho conquered Israel, deposed Joahaz as the king, exiled him to Egypt, and made Israel a vassal state required to pay 3,750 pounds of silver and 75 pounds of gold annually to Egypt. The Egyptian king appointed 25-year-old Eliakim, Joahaz's brother, as acting king of Judah and Jerusalem, changing his name to Jehoiakim. He reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he was evil before the eternal God. Then Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, attacked Israel, carried Jehoiakim bound in bronze chains into exile in Babylon, plundered the Eternal's temple, and put the temple possessions in his own Babylonian temple. The rest of Jehoiakim's rebellion are recorded in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah. Jehoiachin was only 8 years old when he succeeded his father as king in Jerusalem. He too did what the Eternal considered as evil and reigned only 3 months and 10 days. Just after the new year, King Nebuchadnezzar had Jehoiachin exiled to Babylon as well. He also took more valuables from the Eternal's temple. Nebuchadnezzar then appointed Zedekiah, the Babylonian, as acting king of Judah and Jerusalem. When he was only 21 years old, he reigned 11 years from Jerusalem, and he also did what the Eternal One saw as evil. He refused to listen to the guidance of Jeremiah, who advised the king to humble himself before the Eternal. Furthermore, he rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, to whom he had sworn allegiance in the name of God. Then he led the rest of the nation to abandon the Eternal One, God of Israel. All the leaders and priests mimicked the other nations, following pagan gods and desecrating the Eternal's house, which he had sanctified in Jerusalem. Again and again, the eternal God of their ancestors, because of his compassion for his people and his temple, sent messengers to his people, convicting them of the wrongdoings and telling them to return to his ways. But the people mocked the true God's messengers, hated his messages, and laughed at his prophets. Their actions further infuriated the Eternal until there was no way to contain his anger. The Eternal empowered the king of the Chaldeans, who were part of the Babylonian Empire, to attack Israel. This army was merciless, sacrificing Israel's children in their temples and slaughtering everyone else without regard to gender, age, or health. They plundered every treasure in the eternal God's temple and burned God's temple to the ground. They stole the king's and the officers' possessions, tore down the wall of Jerusalem, burned the fortified buildings, and destroyed anything of value in Jerusalem. Anyone who managed to survive the invasion was exiled to Babylon, where they remained servants of the Babylonian court until it was conquered by the Persian Empire. This exile fulfilled the Eternal's message through Jeremiah that Israel would lie quietly at rest and be desolate for 70 years to make up for the generations where they did not observe Sabbath. As soon as Cyrus, the king of Persia, took over the former Babylonian Empire, the Eternal fulfilled his own words, which were relayed by Jeremiah, by compelling Cyrus to send a written proclamation throughout his empire. Cyrus's proclamation was, "The Eternal, the God of heaven, has decided to give me all the kingdoms of the world to rule as my own. In return for this, he has told me to build him a new house in Jerusalem of Judah. Any of his people living in my empire may return to Jerusalem of Judah with the help of the Eternal One and true God." My God, we did it. I know that was long for those of you who are still with me. I know that that was long, but we have completed Second Chronicles. 64 of the 66 books of the Bible are done. And y'all, we're finishing this week. We are literally finishing this week. Tomorrow, we're going to be reading the book of John. We're going to read the book of John over 2 days, tomorrow and the next day. And then we're going to read the book of Revelations over 2 days and be done. Like we're really reading that much of the Bible in a week's time. I'm out of breath a little bit. But before I go, I want to give you the reminder every day this week. Please set your heart, set your intention to join me for the Expecting Greater Fast beginning on January 22nd, ending on February 11th. Begin writing your objectives now. If you don't already have the Focus Fasting Manual, please get it. This is going to be your one-stop guide. The 21-day guide is in here that we're going to be following, giving you all of the instructions of what you need to do every single day for the 21 days of fasting. I think it's been years since I have done this, but this is the year that we're going to follow to the letter, and we're going to be fasting corporately. We're going to be fasting water only, abstaining from all food from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. What I will tell you, I won't govern what you eat, but I will say don't negate the benefits of the fast by eating trashy or just gorging or just filling yourself up or whatever. But after 6 p.m., I would say eat sensibly after 6 p.m. If you can do salads or something like that, I'm not going to give any specific instructions, but I will tell you don't try to make up for the 12 hours that you did not eat. That's like undoing the benefits of the fast by being gluttonous. So for 21 days, we are going to get with God. Y'all, I'm really getting with God during those 21 days. And in the middle of it, I will be traveling to the nation of Kenya. I'll figure out what the schedule is going to look like when I take off for Kenya. But either way, I will take care of you to make sure that I am here to minister to you and end this with you. I said on another video that there will be times that or maybe at the top of this, there will be times that I will call for prayer on a Zoom or go live for prayer, whatever. I'm just going to be doing whatever the Lord leads throughout those 21 days. But we are focused fasting for visitation, and we are digging all the way in. So I don't want to make this already long with all that I shared so far. Be with me tomorrow, starting off with John chapter 1, and we'll finish that book up in 2 days. Blessings to you, and have a great, great day.